Syracuse lost their bowl game last season to USF by 45 points, which would make you think that this season is going to be a lot worse than the last one, where they just barely finished with a sub 500 record due to that game. However, the Orange made a massive move in the offseason, grabbing Ohio State quarterback Kyle McCord out of the transfer portal. McCord wasn't good enough for the Buckeyes, but he should be more than capable of leading this Syracuse team to a very solid record and should be one of the best quarterbacks that the Orange have had in a while. The schedule sets up pretty nicely for Syracuse. The non-conference really not too bad. Games against Ohio, Holy Cross, and UConn all at home. Toughest non-conference games actually that Friday night matchup on the road against UNLV. Really the only one that they might have a chance of losing, and they should still be favored in that one regardless. UNLV is going to be a solid team in the Mountain West. They're the only team that we actually have beating Boise State, the team that we like winning the Mountain West Conference. So they're a good team. Still think Syracuse will have the advantage there on the road. That's definitely a non-conference game to watch out for, especially because it comes right before NC State. Looking at the conference games, that first one in week 2 against Georgia Tech is going to be really interesting. Haynes King and the Yellow Jackets are going to be a pretty solid team this year. Should be right around that 6 to 7 win mark. Probably going to make a bowl game, despite having a really tough schedule. If they don't, I couldn't really see them going much below five wins. They have an early bye week on September 14th, and then come back from that with that Friday night game against Stanford. Should be pretty interesting for maybe a half. After that, I think Syracuse pulls away. They're the better team. Stanford's going to be on a long road trip there. Off of the bye week really also helps Syracuse. They don't have a tough opponent to play the next week. Really just a lot of things going in their favor. So they should win this game against Stanford. We talked about UNLV a little bit. It's going to be a trap game before NC State on the road. Definitely want to watch out for that. That game against the Wolfpack is going to be super, super tough. NC State's one of the dark horses in this conference, but Syracuse could be too. If this is an upset they can pull off on the road, that would be absolutely massive for potentially getting Syracuse into the conference championship. Out of the second bye week, a road trip to Pitt will be pretty close for maybe a half. Next game against Virginia Tech is going to be another one of those really tough matchups in the ACC schedule. Virginia Tech, NC State, Miami, those are probably the 3 best teams that Syracuse plays all year. They were lucky enough to avoid Florida State, Clemson, and Louisville, which is part of the reason that this schedule is pretty manageable. This Virginia Tech game, though, even though it's at home, it's tough to see Syracuse winning. They're really going to have to exceed expectations, especially on the defensive side of the ball, if they want to get that win. Next 2 games, though, shouldn't be too terrible. A road trip to Boston College, one of our bottom-tier teams in the ACC, is definitely a game that Syracuse will be expected to win. On November 16th, they have a very long road trip going all the way to Cal to play the newest member of the ACC conference. It's going to be a tough game on the road. Cal's got a great running back in Jaden Ott. And just overall, it could be a kind of low-scoring game. But I think this might be where Kyle McCord's experience in the Big Ten is able to show through. And he should be able to lead the Orange to a win, but definitely going to be close. The UConn game we already mentioned, one of those non-conference games that's really not going to be much of an issue, especially because it's at home. And then closing out the season with Miami is a super, super tough way to finish. The Canes are one of the teams on the rise in this conference. They're looking to have a really strong season, bringing in Cam Ward from Washington State. So definitely a game there at the end of the year that's going to be super, super tough for Syracuse to win. Overall, they've got 7 home games and 5 away games, with only 2 of their opponents being ranked in our rank and file poll, those being NC State and Miami. The Syracuse Orange have a schedule difficulty of 3 out of 10. Moving on to the prediction. We do have Syracuse winning that first game against Ohio, but then losing in a slight upset at home to Georgia Tech. Now, that's going to be one of the few ACC losses for this season, as they will bounce back after the early bye week with a victory over Stanford. Easy win over Holy Cross to move to 3-1. Back-to-back road trips right after that, and I think a lot of people are sleeping on this UNLV game. I am going to go with UNLV to upset Clemson, or not Clemson, Syracuse. Um, we are going to take UNLV to beat Syracuse. They've got the home field advantage. It's a Friday night game. A lot of interesting things here. UNLV is a solid team, and the fact that Syracuse might get caught looking ahead to NC State, overlook UNLV just because they're a Group of 5 school. There's a lot of different reasons that this one could be an upset, so we are going to take that as a loss for Syracuse, and also a loss at NC State heading into that second bye week at just 3-3. Things get better after that, though. Road trip to Pitt shouldn't be too difficult. It falls just barely into that toss-up category, but this should be a win for Syracuse regardless. We do have them pulling off a slight upset at home against Virginia Tech. This is going to be a good Virginia Tech team. A lot of people are high on them, like I said earlier, but they're going to lose a game or two. They're not going to be undefeated by any means. I think one of those is going to be to Syracuse. These next two games, both at Boston College and at Cal, the road trip to Cal is going to be a little bit tougher, but I do still think they'll be able to win that one. Cal was slight favorites at home, but we are going to take Syracuse, and that moves them to 7-3 going into that UConn game, which should be another pretty easy win. So 8 wins going into the Miami game, and we do have that one as a loss. The Canes are going to be good. That's not an embarrassing loss by any means, even though it's at home. This is a really good Miami team, and we just think they're slightly more talented than Syracuse, so they are going to get the win on the road. But an 8-4 season is very good for the Orange. Definitely something that their fans should be looking forward to. And honestly, looking at this, I mean, they can beat Georgia Tech. They can beat UNLV. They might lose to Virginia Tech, but 9-3 is not impossible. 10-2 seems really unlikely, but there's a chance, you know. It's not impossible for this to be a really, really good year for the Orange. The projected record's a bit lower than our predicted at 6.85 and 5.15, but quite higher than FPI, who's only got Syracuse at 5.8 and 6.2, not even making a bowl game, which I just really don't see happening with this schedule they've got. 1% chance to make the playoffs. It doesn't really seem likely, but who knows? If they can pull off an upset or two, say they beat Miami at home on top of all this, and they pull off those UNLV and Georgia Tech wins, it would definitely be surpassing expectations. So it's not highly likely, but it is possible that we could see this team do really well this year. But we're going to stick with the 8-4 record. That's where I like Syracuse at this year. And anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.